Hello and welcome back, everyone. Mr. McClellan here with the next chapter in Skinnybones. Just a recap of Chapter 3, we learned that Alex Frankovich, the narrator of the story, the one who's telling the story, he is in Little League Baseball. He's been in it for a few years now, and what we learned is that he's not very good at baseball because he always gets the most improved player award. Now that award is pretty impressive. Believe you me, I think that's a great award, but not to Alex, because he gets it year after year after year. And so he feels that if he's always the same person getting that award, it means he's not really good to begin with. So he's really embarrassed about it, and he made a big scene at the award ceremony the last time that they had Little League awards, and his dad was very upset. So now we know a little bit more about Alex. Let's move on to Chapter 4. For me, the worst part about belonging to Little League is the uniforms. Every year, the same thing happens. This year, at my second practice, it happened again. The coach makes everyone line up to tell him what size shirt and pants they need. He calls out a name, and we shout out our size. We have 3 choices: small, medium, and large. I checked out the other kids on my team. There were 12 of us all together. I figured that out of our whole team, there were 5 larges, 6 mediums, and 1 teeny tiny me. Every single year, I am the smallest kid on the team. For a long time, I actually thought that I was a munchkin. I remember when I was in first grade, our teacher asked us to cut out magazine pictures of what we thought we would look like when we grew up. Most of the guys in my class brought in pictures of baseball or football players. A couple of others brought in pictures of policemen. I brought out a picture of a munchkin. I got it out of the TV guide. Munchkins are the short little guys that keep running all over the place in the movie The Wizard of Oz. I think my teacher was surprised when she saw my picture. She called me up to her desk. "Alex, what is this a picture of?" she asked. "It's a munchkin," I answered. "That's what I was afraid of," she said. "Oh, you don't have to be afraid of munchkins, Mrs. Hurley," I said. "They're too short to hurt anyone." "I know that they're short, Alex," she replied. "What I don't understand is why you want to be one when you grow up." "I don't," I answered. "I want to be a baseball player." "Then why did you bring in this picture?" asked Mrs. Hurley. "Because that's what I'm going to look like," I explained. "You said to bring in a picture of what we were going to look like, didn't you?" I guess Mrs. Hurley must have been worried about me. When I got home from school that day, she had already called my mother. As soon as I walked in the door, Mom sat me down and had a nice long talk with me. "Alex," said my mother, "I know that you think you're too short, but that's only because you haven't started to grow as much as some of the other kids. Everyone grows at different speeds. But believe me, you are going to grow. You are not going to be a munchkin." Then she took me by the hand and led me to the kitchen. She stood me up against the wall near the corner and told me not to move. For a minute, I thought she was going to try to shoot an apple off of my head or something. Instead, she got a pencil and made a mark on the wall behind me. When I moved away, she wrote the date right next to it. "Now," she said, "just to prove to you how much you are growing, we will measure you every 6 months. You won't believe it until you see it." Well, all I can say is 6 months is a long time to wait, especially when you're waiting to find out whether or not you're a munchkin. When the day finally came to measure me again, I was pretty nervous about it. My mother stood me up against the wall in the same spot where I had been measured before. Then she carefully made another pencil mark. When I turned to look at it, I was very relieved. I had grown almost half an inch. "Now do you believe me?" asked my mother. "Does this prove to you that you're not going to be a munchkin?" "Yeah, I guess so," I answered. "Now, if I could only figure out a way to put on some more weight." My mother threw her hands in the air. "I give up!" she shouted. "Honestly, Alex, if it's not one problem, it's another. Then she just shook her head and left the room. Sometimes my mother doesn't understand me at all. Being small is not an easy thing to be, especially when you have to shout it out in front of your whole entire baseball team. "Alex Frankovich!" yelled my coach. "Small, medium, or large?" I just couldn't bring myself to say small. In fact, I guess you could say I panicked. "Large!" I shouted. Everyone on the team turned around to look at me. A couple of them laughed. The coach walked over to me. "Did you say large, Alex?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I answered. "Large." "Are you sure that large is the size you take, Alex?" he asked. "Oh, no, sir," I answered. "I usually don't take a large." The coach looked relieved. "Well, what size do you usually take?" "Extra large," I answered. He just looked at me for a minute and then scribbled something down on his paper. As he walked away, he mumbled something to himself that sounded a lot like bubblehead. But I really didn't care what he thought. At least I didn't have to shout out "small" in front of the whole team. I figured that the day the uniforms came would be the best day of my entire life. I even had a dream about it. In my dream, the coach had all the uniforms arranged in two piles, small and large. Then he stood up and began calling out our names and sizes. When your name and size were called, you were supposed to go to the correct pile and select your uniform. "Alex Frankovich! Large!" he shouted, loud enough for everyone to hear. Slowly, I stood up and walked over to the large pile to choose my pants and shirt. When I got there, I realized that my uniform was the only one in the large pile. Everyone else on my team was a small. As I reached down to pick up my large shirt, everyone started to clap. It was the best dream I ever had. Finally, after waiting for 3 whole weeks for my dream to come true, the team uniforms came in. I was so excited I could hardly stand it. When I got to practice that day, I noticed that the coach had arranged the uniforms in 3 piles. My heart started pounding wildly. It was almost like my dream. I felt like I had seen into the future or something. Everyone lined up, and the coach told us to go to the correct pile and pick out a uniform. This wasn't quite as good as if he had called out my name and size, but I really didn't mind. All I really cared about was having everyone see me standing at the large pile. As soon as it was my turn, I rushed over and grabbed a large shirt and a pair of pants. I hung around the pile for a few seconds so everyone could see me standing there. And then I took my uniform and stood back so the other kids could get theirs. When all the piles were gone, the coach told us to check our uniforms to make sure we had chosen the right size. All of a sudden, I heard a few of the guys start to laugh. I turned around and saw Randy Tubbs trying to pull his new shirt over his head. It was stuck on his ears. Randy Tubbs is the biggest kid on our team. His head probably weighs as much as my entire body. "Hey, Coach," he shouted. "I think I got a little problem here." The coach walked over and helped Randy get the shirt off of his head. Then he looked inside to see what size it was. "This is a small, Randy," he said. "You ordered a large." "Yeah," said Randy, "but this was the only uniform left when I got there." The coach started looking all around. All of a sudden, I got this real sick feeling in my stomach. I tried to sneak off the practice field, but as I was walking away, he spotted me. "Hold it, Alex," said the coach. "Bring your uniform over here for a minute, would you?" As I handed the coach my shirt and pants, I checked the tag. "See, Coach, it's a large, just like you ordered for me," I said. "Alex, I ordered you a small," he said. Then he gave my uniform to Randy and handed me the small. Boy, did that ever make me mad! What gave him the right to steal my uniform like that? Randy held up his new shirt. "Now that's better," he said, smiling. When I got home, I tried on my uniform. I sure didn't have any trouble getting it over my head. Good old Randy had really stretched the neck out of shape. It hung down to my stomach. My mother told me not to worry about it. She said the shirt would probably shrink a little when it was washed. I didn't tell her, but I wished the pants would shrink too. They were way too big. And there it is, the end of chapter 4.